Hello there, everybody. My name is Ryan, the official host of Reddit Voice, and today we're going to be looking at some of the top stories from r/NuclearRevenge. Before we do, though, you know the drill. I'd really appreciate it if you made sure you're subscribed and you like this video to stay up to date on all the newest videos. Entitled Lady's Porsche Loses Tire. Okay, so this story took place back when it was Florida in the early 90s. It does involve an act of vandalism that's connected to revenge. Hopefully it won't be removed, and hopefully it'll count as nuclear revenge. Anyway, South Florida was devastated by Hurricane Andrew. My dad, as a part of a local charity, was set up day after day at a local market seeking donations from shoppers to give to food banks. You have to understand from this storm left many people homeless and without power in some cases for 6+ months in Florida heat and humidity. My father was legally disabled from a serious car accident. He was hit by a drunk driver in the early 80s and suffered from relentless hip and back problems. It never killed his heart or kindness to others, hence the charity work. One day he was about to pull into the disabled space at the local market to go buy a few items to donate to the hurricane charity. Right before he is about to pull in, this lady pulls into the space in this shiny red Porsche. My dad parks behind her and says, "Excuse me, ma'am, I was about to pull in there," and also points to his disabled placard in the window. She says to him, "Pfft, you don't look disabled," and proceeded to walk into the store. For anyone who has a relative who uses a disabled space, you know the frustration of the situation and the anger one feels. My dad, seemingly unfazed, waits till she goes into the store, gets out and snips the valve stems on all 4 tires, flattening but not destroying all of them. He then pulls into another space not far away and just waits about 15 minutes until the lady comes out and is shrieking about her car being vandalized. My dad's far enough away so she can't see him, but he can hear everything. She calls the police. Big mistake. She files a report for vandalism, and the police give her a ticket for being parked in the disabled space with no placard. About $250 at the time. The cops leave and she calls a tow truck. As the car's being loaded into the truck, my dad pulls up and says to her, "You don't look disabled, but your car sure is," and then drives off. My dad could be a nice guy and pure savage when he needed to be. Thieving roommate gets what's coming to him. This got removed from r/ProRevenge, but I thought you might want to read it as it still makes me laugh, so nuclear it is. So many years ago, while still a teen, I moved out of my parents' place to live across the street from my junior college. There were many students in the building, so I rented a room in a large basement, 3-bedroom unit that was reserved for students at the school. I didn't really know anyone in the building as it was on the other side of the city from where I grew up. At the time, there was one other roommate already living in the unit who we'll call Sean. To be kind, Sean was the short, fat putz. Older than myself by a few years, he was in some kind of simplified remedial program as he'd failed a couple of school years and mentioned how this was his last chance to make something of himself in his parents' eyes. Kinda dim, not too much going on in his life, but harmless. Or so I thought. Anyways, I was hoping to start things off on the right foot with him as he wants to be my roommate, so I wanted to be friends. As I was moving in my stuff, he mentioned how he had no money for a moving van, so I offered to do a trip with my rented van to his parents if he needed any help moving some stuff of his. He happily accepted, so we drive to his parents where I meet his mother and discover that he's from a somewhat affluent family. Somewhat surprising considering he's too broke to hire a van, but whatever. A couple of days later, I meet his nice girlfriend who lived up the hill from our apartment. Translation, she was extremely affluent. This girlfriend would dote on him, visiting him a lot at our place, to the point where she would regularly hand-deliver him delicious meals that had been prepared at her house. This will be important later. Anyways, it slowly becomes apparent that this unassuming guy has a dishonest streak. While moving my stuff in, I'd mentioned that I had a spare waterbed. He immediately offered to buy it, so I moved it in myself and set it up with the agreement he'd pay me a friend price. Around $200 for a $700 bed. Weeks pass and he keeps giving me excuses about not paying whenever the subject comes up. He then starts to randomly shift the narrative to a story about how his wealthy parents can pay for us to get a great condo and new development just up the street. I remember wondering why his parents would make such an offer despite the fact we had just moved into our current apartment. The story didn't make sense. Nevertheless, he'd constantly try to set up some visit with me and get me involved. I wasn't really interested in moving again at that point, so I never really pursued it. I learned later that this was not only a lie, but a typical ploy of his. Anyways, as I had just moved out of my old neighborhood, I hadn't opened up a new bank account. This was before internet banking in the new part of town, so I was keeping my money, a couple hundred, hidden in my room until I set up an account nearby. I was only loosely keeping track of the money and barely noticed how my money was going a little quickly until one day I go to get my last $40 and it's gone. Unfortunately, by this point, a third roommate has moved into our flat. A cool hippie dude from Maritimes. So although I was convinced it was Sean that had robbed me, I wasn't 100% sure. To resolve things as amicably as possible, I decided to give him a chance to come clean. So one night I asked him point blank, fairly casually, if he'd taken my money. As I had noticed, a small amount was missing. I'll never forget his reaction. He immediately stiffened, his eyes glazed over, and he blurted out, "I didn't take anything. It wasn't me." And just stared at me. I was shocked. He didn't just look guilty. His reaction had such a rehearsed quality I could tell he'd been accused of similar things many times before. I tried my best to be calm, smile, and act as if I believed him, but inside I was livid. I couldn't stop thinking about how this guy was trying to play me like a fool. I realized that although I knew it was him, I couldn't do anything about it until I had proof. By this point, I felt sick to be living in the same space as the guy. I realized to get out of the situation and deal with the jerk appropriately, I would have to lay a trap. To make sure he didn't suspect anything, the next day I was all smiles, playing dumb. I exclaimed loudly how, "I hope I don't lose my money again, I just got paid," and leave the apartment. Before I left, I made sure to leave my video camera filming my room. This was so long ago, it was a huge-ass VHS tape camera that I had to hide on my bed under pillows and shit. But it still worked like a charm. I came back, replayed the tape, and 16 minutes in, I see that mother effer going through my stuff. I tell you, I went cold as ice seeing Sean casually rifle through my things. My suspicions confirmed. I had to cool off with my friends across town over some beers. When I finally told them all what was happening, they started pulling out bats, hockey sticks, and suggesting we go pay Sean a visit. As tempting as this was, I was now in college and didn't want to resort to messy violence. So instead, I plotted my revenge. The first thing I did was to make sure my cool hippie third roommate was in the loop. Not having had a lot of time to get to know him, I asked him his thoughts on retribution and if he agreed with an eye for an eye. Confident we were on the same page, I showed him the video. He freaks out over having a thief for a roommate, but I reassure him to just be cool, cause some things are going to happen with Sean real soon. Then I went to stay at my parents' house and waited until that Thursday. You see, Sean liked to talk a lot. Turns out this rich parents had actually kicked him out of the house. The fact he'd actually found an apartment and gone back to school was a big success for him. On Thursday, he'd be out of the apartment as his parents were having a big congratulatory dinner for him at their place. So I waited until I knew the dinner was underway, then called his house to speak with his mother. Crazy thing is, both he and his sister pick up the phone at the same time. So while his sister goes to get his mom on the line, he's asking me loudly, "Why are you calling my mother?" repeatedly. His mother gets on, and while Sean's screaming at his mother to hang up, I calmly state, "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I have reason to believe your son has stolen from me." Suddenly, there's dead silence. After almost a minute, she replies, "Take it up with Sean," and just hangs up. What the hell? I don't know what reaction I expected, but it wasn't that. Anyway, now with just Sean on the line, I tell him the jig is up. I have him on tape and want my money back. His replies, "You have nothing on me, F you." At this point, I realize he's right. I'd really only filmed him rifling through my stuff. If I went to the police, the charges wouldn't stick, and there was a good chance he knew it. So by this point I tried very hard to be reasonable about things, but as it was, his rich parents couldn't care less. I had no real proof to go to the police with, and worst of all, I still had a year-long lease to live with him. So, F that shit, I told him he'd better find another place to live and hung up the phone as it was time to go nuclear on his ass. Remember how I said the putz talked too much? Turns out he'd bragged about how he'd faked his credentials for the apartment and landlord had never checked. So first step was to drive with my folks to the landlord's office and tell them to evict him for theft immediately. When they start telling me crap like, we'll have to take some time to review this matter, I immediately threaten a lawsuit over how they're liable as I can prove they never did the prescribed background check. My landlord goes pale and instantly promises everything I ask. I then take this moment to go downstairs for a minute, a statement witnessed by multiple people. I then go to Sean's room and take thousands of dollars of his expensive shit. Stereo, TV, thousands of dollars of his hockey jerseys, cologne, etc. And put it all outside for our enclosed/hidden fire escape. I then go straight back upstairs, hello alibi, and leave with my folks. First chance I get, I call my friends with the bats. Hey guys, who wants a new wardrobe and entertainment system? I give them the instructions on how to find all of Sean's stuff hidden in the unused back alley and chill with parents for the next 3 to 4 days. Upon my return to the apartment, I am greeted with awe by a highly entertained hippie roommate who gave me the play-by-play of what went down in my absence. Apparently, Sean returned from his dinner to an empty room devoid of any of his possessions, causing him to rampage through the apartment and curse my name. When Hippie innocently asked, "What's wrong, Sean?" He tells him that I stole all of his stuff, but that his dad would get it back for him. As if. The next morning, his alarm clock was the landlord walking into his room and showing it to a potential tenant while informing him that he was evicted immediately. He would later be dumped by his rich girlfriend who was buying his groceries. You haven't changed, Sean, again with the lying and cheating. And disowned very publicly by his well-to-do dad. Indeed, his dad had come to the apartment only to tell Sean he was worthless and that despite his crying and begging, he could not live back at the house. Desperate, Sean followed his dad outside and jumped on the hood of his car, pleading to go home. The dad had to drive to a nearby police station to have him removed. Last thing I heard, he was broke, dropped out of school, dumped by girlfriend, and camping in a friend's backyard in a tent in Canada in November. Too long didn't read. Roommate who I was nice to betrays my trust by lying and stealing from me, so I basically destroyed his life for at most 120 Canadian dollars. Edit. Addendum to show that I made the call that ruined Sean's homecoming dinner from my parents' place across town and not my shared apartment. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of today's r/NuclearRevenge. If you liked it, you should check out some of our other stuff and even subscribe.